So my name is Lyla Latif. I'm a Kenyan-based lawyer and an international consultant on taxation. I work a lot with respect to designing the tax frameworks and the tax systems of many developing countries, particularly Africa. And when we think about taxation, the problem of debt is becoming quite an issue and even a hindrance, because debt in itself, not debt between an individual and another individual or an individual and an institution, but it's when our governments, the state itself, is borrowing from a multilateral institution such as the World Bank, from a private creditor, or even, from China. Now, the consequences of that debt, some of these debts were incurred many years ago, some of them a few years ago, and the recurring problem that we are seeing right now is the rise of austerity measures, which is kind of problematic for our budget systems, because now we're seeing that all the tax revenue that we are collecting as African countries, majority of that is going to now offset the debt that is now mature. What that means is that our budgets are now suffering from a deficit. We cannot finance the right to health, the right to education. We can't even protect the right to life, right? We cannot even provide basic infrastructure facilities to our citizens and also go ahead and strengthen our social contract and create legitimacy as part of our relationship with our state. That's the consequence of debt. And what you're seeing is that now the debt that we have is not between a sovereign state and a sovereign state, like Kenya is borrowing from France or Ethiopia is borrowing from the United Arab Emirates. It's basically our African nations are borrowing from private lenders. So if you look at the 100% of debt that sovereign nations are now attracting, more than 40% is debt that they're taking from private creditors. And that's really serious. It's alarming, and it's a subject for us to really stop and ask ourselves, are we doing the right thing? Because when you're bringing in the private lender, you're bringing in foreign rules, right? And these are foreign contractual rules, and if we're not careful with these rules, we're putting up our country for auction, in other words, right? I'll give you an example. So many of these contracts are designed by the creditor because they're the ones giving you the capital. So they will have critical legal provisions in their contract to protect them against the country's default. So what this simply means that they will have like a clause that talks about an escrow account. Now, us as citizens, we might think an escrow is actually a good thing because our state, from the tax revenue that it collects, it's taking a percentage and putting it in the escrow account as a saving, right? So when the debt is matured, we'll be able to offset it from the escrow account. But the reality, right, is that that escrow account, in as much as we are putting in our tax revenue in it, we are not entitled to use it at all. The immediate rights for that escrow account are for the private creditor. So think about the COVID issue that hit our countries, the pandemic. Suppose there's a pandemic and the state doesn't have money. Even in that situation, the state cannot touch the escrow account. This is the level of power asymmetry that these debt contracts are pushing our African countries into, and it's a huge concern. That lack of transparency is also problematic because some of these contracts are not open for the public to be able to review, to provide their perspective and even tell their state, well, be careful, this particular clause in this contract's asking you to waive your sovereign immunity. So the private creditor can take you to court in New York and sue you. And once they win the case, they can come and say, okay, we're attaching your airport. We're taking all your diplomatic embassies around the world because you have failed to pay us your tax. What does that do to our country? It pushes us towards insolvency. It pushes us towards regression and fiscal deficits, which is not good for us in the long run. So these are the problems that we are seeing with debt going forward. These are the legal issues that are emanating, and we need to be careful about that. So I'm thinking, as a very strong solution for African nations, collectively, we must think about designing our own debt convention or a debt contract. So you see, at the United Nations currently, we have the OECD model that we use for negotiating tax treaties. And we've seen a lot of discrimination, inequalities, power asymmetries within these treaties. And now the Africa group, led by Nigeria, they decided to go to the UN and say, we don't want the OECD treaty anymore. We want to have a UN model treaty that we are going to negotiate. So if they can do that, what's stopping us as African countries to say that these contracts that we have from private lenders, from China, they're worded differently, but the end game is the same. It's waive your sovereignty, lack of transparency, have escrow accounts, accelerate the provision. So if I miss my payment by a day, the entire debt becomes mature. Which country is going to be able to finance that? So to avoid such repercussions, let us, through the Africa Union, right, sit down and say it's about time Africa decides for itself. If we want to continue borrowing, we want to borrow on our terms. And our terms mean that we're going to draft our own contractual provisions. And I think in drafting our own contractual provisions, we will be more careful. We're not going to have the escrow accounts. We're not going to have acceleration accounts. We're going to be open about disclosure and transparency and accountability, and that's going to protect our sovereign rights. So that's my proposal going forward. Thank you.
Can you elaborate a bit about the escrow account? What does it mean for a layman?
Okay, so an escrow account is like a security box. If I'm taking money from you, or rather, let's say I, Lyla, want to borrow money from you, Ada, you'll tell me, I'll give you the money, but you also have to give me a collateral. In case you miss your payment, I have something that I can take as an asset, sell it, and recover my proceeds. But in a debt contract, that collateral is one, but in addition to the collateral, they also ask for an escrow account. It's simply a word that says a safe box somewhere. So you open an account, and that account you open in the name of the private creditor, for example, and the name of your country. So the Republic of, it's maybe the Minister of Finance with a vulture fund out there. You open the account jointly so that the nation or the country, whatever percentage of tax revenue that they want, maybe 0.2% of the entire tax revenue that they've collected, they'll put it into the escrow account. It will be held in joint ownership, but the first rights, the pledging rights, would be the rights of the private creditor to take from the escrow account whatever amount they feel that they should to offset any deficits or any delays in payments that have been made. It's like a safety security box, but one that you're funding but you can't access. I hope that's a bit clear.
Yes.
Yeah?
One more thing.
Yes.
About this guarantee that they give. Do we have examples like natural resource or big infrastructure used as a guarantee from your experience? Or?
Yeah. So the very pertinent example for us is what recently happened in Sri Lanka, right? They signed a debt contract, and part of the collateral that they were offering under their contract was that in case there's a default, they had pledged their seaport to their creditors. So Sri Lanka 2 years ago went into a financial crisis. The austerity was so bad, people were rioting on the road, and then later on we find out that the creditor had actually attached their port. The other example that I have, and this is an example that's kind of off the records, but when you speak to people on the ground, the information they give you is that the Chinese, in giving loans to Uganda, have secured or collateralized the airport of Uganda as part of their loan project. So even when you go and go to the Uganda airport today, you'll see a lot of Chinese writings on the wall. You'll see a lot of indication that that port is under the control of the Chinese. Now, whether it has been put up as a collateral is not clear because we don't have the contract to confirm it. But if you look at the situation where Greece, for example, was undergoing the financial crisis, they had secured a lot of debt from Germany. And at the time that Greece went into fiscal austerity, what the Germans did is that they went ahead and secured the port, the airport of Greece, because as part of their contract, it was like, if you can't pay, we will secure your sovereign infrastructure and your sovereign assets. And that's another example of a debt contract gone wrong, which is a European contract. So you see, this is not an African problem. It's a problem of a creditor who sits in the global north who's calling the shots, right? The Germans took the airport of the Greek. The Chinese potentially are taking the airport of the Ugandans if the Ugandans default. The other creditor who provided the loans to Sri Lanka took control of their seaport. Under the Kenya's debt contract with China, we call it the SGR contract. And in the SGR contract, the argument was that the Chinese have simply said, as collateral, we should also offer our Mombasa seaport. But when you read the contract, it doesn't say that explicitly. But there's a lot of commotion out there. And this is also where public scrutiny has to be a bit tamed. We cannot make allegations which are not true. And that's why it's very important for governments to show us the debt contracts so that people out there don't feel our ports have been attached. Because once you read the contract and you don't see it there, you are at least secure. So transparency can really support a long way to show the way in which the government is collateralizing its loan.
So
there's a lot of move that we're seeing in the world today. At the Africa Union, we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement that's signed. That's a potential move by Africa to become one, harmonious, right? AFRODAD has its borrowing charter, which provides African countries with the guidelines on how they need to structure their public finance management system so that they bring about that level of transparency that is needed in the debt. At the UN, we're seeing developing countries come together to decide that we want new tax rules. So the same thing with debt. Africa can take leadership. We can be the rule maker. We can choose to create the table that we want to sit at to design our debt going forward. So AU must take leadership.